right, so welcome to Dementia Talks, an educational talk series on dementia and caregiving for Alzheimer's Awareness Month. My name is Herman Chica Alfonso, and I'm the Education and Program Coordinator for the Dementia Society of Ottawa and Renfrew County. We are pleased to introduce our speaker today. She is Claire Webster. She's a certified Alzheimer's care consultant and founder of Caregiver Crosswalk, also founder and ambassador of the McGill Dementia Education Program, and as well as McGill Cares. So without further ado, I will turn over to Claire, and welcome, Claire. What a pleasure to have you here today, and thank you.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to all the people joining. And I'll be looking forward to hearing from you at the end of my presentation. I'm broadcasting from Montreal, Quebec, and I know that our mutual provinces are going through a really tough time right now with COVID, and that many of you are feeling very isolated. In my presentation, I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges of caregiving that you'll be facing. And I do it in a way where I'm really sharing my own personal story as well as my professional experience. To begin, I don't believe that my story is any more difficult than what some of you may be going through. It was part of my healing process, however, as a former caregiver to do the work that I'm doing. So I will take you along my journey. So the premise of everything that I do is that I truly believe that a lack of education about dementia will definitely have a significant impact on the quality of care and safety of the individual, but as well as on the family member. So because there is no cure right now for this disorder, it's really important that everyone be as educated as possible. And that's what I really truly believe is the success of navigating this program. So to begin, I'm a former caregiver. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease actually in September of 2006. My father had passed away in early January 2005 of congestive heart failure. I'm an only child, no siblings. And so I was her primary caregiver throughout a period of close to 13 years. And this just gives you an idea of, kind of like the before and after of the journey. As many of you know or will come to know, unfortunately, it's not only a disease that affects a person's cognitive abilities, but there is a significant physical change that happens as well. And I really represented at the time what we call the sandwich generation caregiver. So I was a very young mom. My youngest daughter was born in October 2000 and October 23rd, 2004. I had been on bed rest, and literally 2 weeks after my daughter was born, my father was hospitalized for congestive heart failure, and died a couple months later. And I became, all of a sudden my mother started displaying all kinds of symptoms, and so my life just became a complete whirlwind of caregiving, which lasted for many, many years. As a result of my journey, which I'll be sharing with you, that is not receiving any type of information from the healthcare system, I decided to become a certified consultant. And what I do primarily is that I educate families from A to Z, what the disease is, how it's going to progress. How do you anticipate what's coming next? Because really one of the key is understanding if your loved one, depending on the stage that they're at, you need to know what's coming next. So it's always important to anticipate next phases. Then navigate. How do you navigate the healthcare system? How do you access resources from the community? And then most importantly, how do you advocate on behalf of your loved one? Because when they get to a stage where they can no longer represent themselves, no longer communicate, how can we be their voice? So that's my biggest mission. At the end of the day, what we all want is to ensure that our loved ones are happy, safe, and clean. That was my primary objective from the time that my mother left home and then transitioned into private care and then public healthcare system. I mean, I spent all of my time advocating so that those three objectives were met. In addition to being a consultant, I'm the founder of McGill University's Dementia Education Program. I had this goal in 2000 and, well, since 2011, I guess, to change the healthcare system. And I thought the only way I'm going to change the healthcare system is by educating the medical students of the future. And I literally knocked on the door of the dean of the Faculty of Medicine one day. I did not attend McGill. I was just an ordinary citizen who had an idea. And they really opened their arms and welcomed me into the university and gave me this platform where I can develop this amazing program. And I work with two of the greatest doctors, Dr. Serge Gauthier, who's world renowned, who's on my left in this photo, and Dr. José Moret, who's a geriatrician, who's head of the whole MUHC in Montreal. So I'm truly blessed to work with these great men. And prior to COVID, we were actually teaching family caregivers like yourselves at the university in a simulation center that's used to train medical students. So we were doing a lot of lectures with family members, lectures given by geriatricians and neurologists. And we had a simulated apartment where we would use actors to show what it was like to have dementia, all of the safety issues that would happen. So we would bring caregivers through this whole simulated experience, and really hoping that one day we'll be able to return there. But for example, we would use props to show how, for instance, a bottle of Lysol could be mistaken for a bottle of olive oil, or how cortisone cream could be mistaken for toothpaste. So we were really putting caregivers through these simulations. And then we were having guest speakers. Some of you may be familiar with Chris Wynn, who's done a couple of documentary films called Much Too Young and Forever Not Forgotten. Former caregivers who would also come and give their testimonials. And then COVID happened. So as a result of COVID, I turned around in May of 2020, and I do weekly webcasts. There will be links sent to you after this presentation tonight, but you could go on mcgill.ca/dementia. I do webcasts with leading healthcare professionals on all kinds of topics, not only related to dementia, but related to cancer, to Parkinson's disease. I'm doing one this week on autism. So it's really just half an hour short interviews that just are as a way to educate families on all kinds of different topics. And then this is an amazing resource for you as well. It's an activity booklet. It could also be very useful for young moms at home with children, or even healthy adults. It was done by 4 students from the McGill School of Physical and Occupational Therapy, all kinds of recreational and leisure activities that are very useful, especially now during this time of isolation. So I also do quite a bit of talks in the media. I'm really advocating on behalf of family members that we're not being educated enough, we're not being given enough support. So I've been really trying to be, at least in Montreal, a champion on behalf of care families. And all the work that I'm doing is really about trying to push the healthcare system to insist that upon diagnosis, you must give family members information. For example, if you were diagnosed with heart disease or cancer or any other illness, you would never leave the doctor's office without what I call a prescription of care. But why is that not happening with dementia? And I do the work that I do because when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I knew nothing about this disease at all. I had never heard of it before. These were the words that I received. This was the prescription of care that I got. It was, "Good luck, Mrs. Webster." That was it. The only other bit of piece of information was I was asked if my mother was still driving, which she was, and the doctor proceeded to remove her license on the spot. But that was it. I wasn't given any other type of information other than, "Good luck, Mrs. Webster. Maybe you can consult the web." So at the time, my mother was 74 when she received her diagnosis. In retrospect, it probably began in her late 60s. My mother was a caregiver all of my life to my dad. My dad did not have any cognitive difficulties, but he had a whole slew of physical ailments, like many, many, many. And I grew up in a home watching my mother be a caregiver to my father. And so when she started to display some odd changes in personality, this was already back in 2002, I kept saying, "Oh, it's just stress. My mother's stressed. She's stressed about this." Because I myself had no idea about what were the signs and symptoms of dementia. I would have never imagined my mother, who was a very healthy, fit woman, could potentially have anything wrong in this area. And so, I'm not going to go into all the signs and symptoms because that's what the Dementia Society is here for. But what I will tell you is that My mother's early signs had nothing to do with memory. It was truly a significant change in personality. A lot of conspiracy theories, believing that, that drug dealers were living next door when it was actually Canada Post coming to deliver parcels. It was the way that she was beginning to dress. It was the type of words she was using towards my children. And I also must say that one of my biggest challenges at the time was, my dad had passed away the year before. When she was showing all of these symptoms, I didn't even know what type of doctor to take her to see. I mean, I was saying to myself, do I take her to see a family doctor? Does she need to see a psychologist? And the other challenge, like I'm sure many of you have gone through, is my mother didn't believe anything was wrong with her. So it was a real battle to even get her to see somebody. So lo and behold, in September of 2006, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And, when I say I was representing the sandwich generation, this was my life. In this image, my husband looks like one of my four children, but I had a very young family. This again gives you a perspective. I was very close to my mom. And, as many of in life, when you're caring for somebody, well, there's a whole other slew of things that go on. So there's all like you can expect the unexpected. So in my case, first of all, my mother wasn't able to remain at home. I had to pretty much move her out of her apartment as soon as possible. I did not, because I wasn't educated on the disease, I did not know what to look for in terms of residences. So I knew that there was a residence not far from where I lived. I didn't do the necessary research to say, could they, did they have the skilled training and staff to be able to care for somebody with dementia? Along my journey with my mom, she needed an emergency surgery for hip replacement. I wasn't warned about the impact of anesthesia on her. So she had hip replacement surgery that unfortunately went terribly wrong, suffered a heart attack post surgery. She suffered a broken femur post surgery. And then I also, during the time that she was in the rehabilitation, she wasn't able to be rehabilitated because she wasn't understanding the instructions from the OTs. So what should have been a 2 to 3 week stay in the hospital turned into a 6 month stay. And then the other reality was, during the time that my mother was in private care, which by the way, we used up all of her life savings. What we're hearing about today on the news with regards to a lack of care, lack of training, there needs to be better policies in place. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I mean, the image below where she has a broken hand, my mother had wandered off the so-called lockdown floor. She broke her hand. It was never reported. So these type of incidents were going on long before all of what we're hearing. The other reality is as the disease was progressing, I realized she wasn't getting, proper care. And so I had to truly advocate on her behalf. Now, I don't know the way it works in Ontario, but in Quebec, the only way to transition into a long-term care is via the public healthcare network, which we call the CLSC. Again, I wasn't educated on that. I was spending so much time trying to, get hold of social workers and getting her on a list. The waiting list I was told was 2 to 3 years. You could see how her health and her care was deteriorating. And so, I spent a lot of time advocating and making phone calls. And, I truly believe that, you should not be waiting by the phone for a social worker to call you back. You have to take the steps, and you really need to be the ones that's being assertive and calling them. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, my goals of keeping my mother happy, safe, and clean were not working out at all. And so I had to advocate on her behalf. And I succeeded because if you look at this picture, normally when I'm in a room of people, I could see their reactions. But by changing the residence that she was in, by ensuring she was getting the quality of care she deserved, you can see the difference, in the care that she was getting. So this is an example of really being an advocate on behalf of your loved one. However, when I say expect the unexpected, I was, as you can imagine, I was spending a lot of time caring for my mom, but I had three children. The year that my mother suffered the hip replacement surgery, my son had a terrible accident while he was at a summer camp. He ended up with a broken femur in the hospital for 3 weeks in traction, in a wheelchair, learning to walk again because it was a severe accident. A couple years later, also, he was a soccer player. He got kicked in the face. So I was at a stage of my life for many years where I was just like fielding off all of these unexpected obstacles that were heading my way. And then, in addition to that, and being the mother and being the wife and, being what society was expecting of me, with dementia, the disease is ever evolving and ever progressing. So I had to also deal a lot with, end of life decisions, watching them, what we call anticipatory grief. It's really, watching this woman constantly changing, not only cognitively, but physically, managing my daughters who at one time were comfortable visiting her in a residence, but it wasn't becoming possible. Also making decisions where my mother was once upon a time a very mobile woman, wasn't able to use the walker anymore because she was either losing the walker or falling. So those certain decisions where, I had to make that she would have to be transferred into a wheelchair. And then, again, end of life coming and what decisions, like I must tell you that I did not have anybody there guiding me or telling me what to expect. I was truly just winging it, as they say. Whatever was happening at the time, I was just managing it. I wish I would have been better prepared for what I was coming to. So as a result, I really got caught up in what I call the cyclone of caregiving. It's that moment that once you get in there, you just can't get out. And I was just constantly caught up with all kinds of responsibilities and expectations. But what I could, like I'm sure many of you or people that when somebody does finally ask you, how you're doing, I would just put on that big smile and, basically say, many thanks. I'm not there. I'm all good. Everything's fine. But nothing was fine because I was like managing my family, managing society's expectations. My daughters were like, how come I'm not like all the other moms and, going to their plays at school, or how come I'm not a lunch mother, and how come I'm not going to all those soccer games, and I kept having to say, well, it's because mommy had to be with grandma at the rehabilitation center in the hospital. So, you know, it was just this type of life where like my breath was being taken away by it all, and that's the image I kept trying to portray. That was my biggest downfall, right? I just wanted the outside world to believe that I had everything under control, but I really did not have everything under control. So while I was going through all of that, what were some of the emotions that I was feeling? Well, there was the denial. I mean, I have to say, I wasn't really in denial. And I bring up this word because I know that a lot of people are in denial, but I guess I was really completely like, I couldn't believe that this was happening. The guilt that only I can be with my mom, nobody else can be at the hospital with her, nobody else can do all of this. Anticipatory mourning is when you're constantly in a state of mourning, which I did not even realize. I only realized this after her death, that I had been already mourning for 12 years, ever since I had received the diagnosis. You're grieving. This is a disease that makes you much more isolated. But I have to say, the overriding emotion that I felt the majority of time was truly anger. I was angry at my mother, not my mother, but I was angry at this disease for doing to my mother what it was doing. I felt that she had put in her time all those years caring for my dad. Why did this have to happen? Why did this happen to me? Why is this happening to my family? And the way that I would deal with my anger led me to feel a lot of shame, because what we realize is that most of us, whether you're caregivers or anytime people normally under stressful situations, we do have coping mechanisms. And my coping mechanism was wine, lots of it. So, I was never somebody who drank during the day, but I'd pick up the girls at school, come home, and then all of a sudden, like, 4:30, 5 o'clock, open up the bottle, that the 3 glasses turned to 4. Some nights it was a bottle and a half. And I must say, there may be some nights, depending on my level of stress, it was approaching 2. And then the other thing that I would do is I would scream a lot. I would yell a lot. And I would also go online, do some online shopping, and then wake up the next day feeling totally hungover, making the promise to myself I wasn't going to do this again. But the cycle just kept going over and over and over again. Right. But what I did not realize at the time was when I was going through all of these things is that my children were watching me. So while I was watching my mother unravel, my children were watching me unravel. And it would only be a couple of years after that I had suffered a nervous breakdown in 2011. It would only be a couple of years later that I truly realized the impact that it would have on my children, especially my youngest daughter, who would recall the times that the ambulance came for mummy or that mummy drank too much. And so when I work with sandwich generation caregivers today, I always remind them if they have young kids or teenagers that your kids are watching, so you really owe it to yourself and to your family as much as possible to take care of yourself. So caregiver burnout, what does it look like? Well, this will be a good image of a couple of weeks before I had my burnout. Now, it doesn't just happen overnight. A lot of people ask me like, oh my gosh, like how did it happen? It's an accumulation. Like for me, it was an accumulation of years. And it wasn't only to do with my mother. I had other things going on in my life. So it's an accumulation of things that go on. But when the tip of the iceberg really happens is like, when that those angry outbursts really don't end. I mean, I would go from 0 to 100 over anything. I had no patience. I mean, my poor girls, we come home from school, and I keep saying my girls because my son was really, thank goodness, in most of his part, he was quite independent. But when they would ask me to help with the homework, I had no patience. I'd be like, go do it yourselves, or go ask your brother, or I just couldn't, like, I had no patience when I was at home, right? And other people, it could be a never ending feeling of sadness or unhappiness. You want to isolate yourself from your friends, you aren't sleeping properly. I say self-medication because some people drink, some people smoke, do drugs, they use online shopping, gambling. There's all kinds of ways people cope. But if you realize that those coping mechanisms, start to take over, that's when you realize you've got a bit of a problem. And then also once you have suicidal thoughts, and that was exactly what was happening to me. I just was going to a very, very, very dark place constantly. And for the sake of my family and for my kids, fortunately, I finally decided to ask for help. But I had to reach a critical stage in my health, not only my mental health, but in my physical health, in order to ask for help. And I see that a lot when I'm working with families. So Superwoman was in crisis, and I'll tell you how I got out of that. So basically, with regards to this illness, it doesn't only have an impact, as you know, on the person who's diagnosed. It really has a ripple effect. So it has a ripple effect on the care partner, because it doesn't not necessarily have to be the spouse or the kids. Sometimes a care partner could be a cousin, it could be a friend. So that it has a ripple effect on the care partners. It has an impact on their family. So like in my case, it had a ripple effect on me with early onset dementia, people that are still working. It has an impact on the employment, it has an impact on their friends, has an impact on their healthcare systems. So it's a disease that has so many different impacts on different areas. And then that whole now what syndrome. So the moment that you're sitting in that doctor's office and you're being presented with this news that is going to change your life. So it could be also somebody who's being told, you've got cancer or you've got serious heart disease. The shock factor is when that you're presented with a piece of information that will change your life forever. What I want to share with you is that the coping mechanisms that I had adopted during my years, so not only the drinking, but it was the way that I was responding to stress. So, I was living by the phone all the time, like, oh my God, the residence is calling, or oh my God, the school is calling. Even when my mom passed away, I had physically trained myself to respond that way over everything. That it took me years to let go of that and unlearn that. So that's the journey that I'm currently on now. So I'm unlearning my response mechanisms. So for instance, I don't drink anymore. I had to give up alcohol a while ago. I had to learn how to breathe. I had to learn to not react so impulsively towards things. But just be aware, because I wasn't aware until my mom passed away. I thought that, oh, once she passes away, I'll be fine. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to, I won't drink as much. I'm not going to yell as much. That's not true. Okay. So you really need to pay attention to the coping mechanisms. The most frequently asked questions that people have are, what's the disease, how it's going to progress, what type of care will he or she need, will they have to move, can they stay at home, where will they go, what's the difference between a private residence and or a public long-term care, what type of home care supports available, how will the disease impact my life. All of these questions are going through, care partners, caregivers minds upon the diagnosis, and this is what is not being answered to us. And this is where I really believe that it's important to be educated in all these areas. And now if you add COVID into the mix, I mean, how are people accessing support? So it's a very, very complex illness. The other thing that you need to take care of, and I'm sure that the Dementia Society will be doing or has done, lectures on this area, and there's some very good information about this. It's right now for those people who are caring for somebody at home, is to be mindful of their safety. Because as the disease progresses, the vision changes, the mobility changes, the hearing changes. You need to make sure that you're safe proofing your home. You make sure, like, you should never take for granted, even if you say, oh, my wife, my husband, my mom and dad, they don't cook. Who they are becoming and who they were are two different things. So safety of the home is paramount, to make sure that in your bathrooms you have anti-slip mats. If the person is waking up at night, that they're not wandering, or that there is a risk that they could wander outside the home, that you can put the alarm on. Driving is a very, very a serious issue to consider, because as the disease progresses, the person, it will no longer be able to recognize red light, yellow light, green light, crosswalk, even just turning on these cars today. So there's so many considerations that need to be made with regards to security and safety of the person when they are diagnosed with dementia. And also, how do you safe proof? I really believe that today, as much as possible, people should have their alarm systems on, because we are home so much. So for a caregiver, if you're asleep at night, or you've reached a point where you're sleeping in separate bedrooms, make sure that your loved one is safe at night. You do not want to have anybody falling and having to go to the hospital today at all. You really want to avoid the hospitals as much as possible, right? And when we talk about safety, it's also about unusual financial transactions. When I speak to family members and ask them what is the most, what are the items that stresses them out the most, it often comes back to financial. It's a very costly disease to manage financially, and early on, even before a person is diagnosed, there's often times where they've made a lot of significant financial errors. So you have to be mindful of emails that could be fraudulent, telephone calls that could be fraudulent. Pay attention to how somebody is managing their financial affairs. I mean, I wasn't, I was living, I'd been married, away from my parents, and only after my father passed away did I realize that my mother was sending money to the same charities over and over and over again. Instead of making one donation a year, she was making multiple donations, not being able to pay her credit cards, paying her bell bills, really being, caught up by some fraudulent business people, or all kinds of things. So there's a big financial risk, especially early on in the disease, that you really need to be mindful of. And then the other, the other advice I would share with you also was the fact that, if the person starts frequently losing or misplacing their wedding rings, or any type of thing of sentimental value, it's really time to consider giving it away. The families that I work with right now, they're always, saying, I don't know, how do I take my mom's ring? You know, just say something like, we have to have it, we need to have the insurance evaluated, or we need to have it clean. But you really need to try to, protect a person's, not only financial well-being, but anything that could be, materialistic, that is meaningful as well. So living, at home right now, what's going on with a lot of families, it's really about understanding and being able to respond to challenging behaviors. I think that's what's really, the hardest right now for people that don't have necessarily have the experience and understand the illness. Why are people behaving the way they are? Why are there days where they are frustrated? Or are they're getting angry? And normally it's one of six different things. I mean, as the disease evolves, it's normal that there are changes going on in the brain, so that and depending on the type of dementia they have, it will definitely affect their personality. It's the environment. Maybe they're overstimulated. We're all home. Maybe you've got the television going on and the radio, or the animals are barking too much, or the kids are running around too much. Look at the environment. What are certain triggers that could be causing this challenging relationship, right? And what I know for sure is that it's also the relationship between the caregiver and the person, right? It's even in normal, among cognitively healthy people, it's a challenge to live with the same person day in and day out, right? So if you're frustrated, your loved one is definitely going to be feeling your frustration. Okay, so what is happening? What are the triggers? Is the routine off? Like, what is going on? And, you know, I mean, I could spend a whole lecture just on that topic, but there's two things that there's two types of advice that I give people. One is the use of the compassionate lie. So, to get if you're going to present your loved one with information that is going to upset them terribly, why do it? Okay, so think about when they're asking you questions or repeating themselves, or the caregivers are always like, do I need to tell them the truth about this all the time? Should I always be truthful? If you're going to present them with information that is going to really upset them, is it worth it right now? Right? And it's also about joining their journey. I see a lot of frustration among couples where one of them starts telling a story about their past, and the wife is there trying to correct her husband. Again, if he's saying things that are not hurting anybody, just join their journey, let them speak. Okay, because the worst thing that you can do is start constantly trying to correct somebody, cut them off, nitpick. Okay, just let them talk. Okay, and I know it's hard to hear the same things over and over again, but if you try to tell them, why can't you remember, why can't you do this, you're just triggering. So using the compassionate lie and truly just joining their journey, let them talk. And most importantly, at this time during isolation, is pick your battles. Again, if they're doing or saying something that is not hurtful to you or to themselves, let them do it. If they're going and they're changing their clothes 5 times a day, or wearing different mismatched clothes, or just doing things that are truly, you have to think of this through now. They're not hurting themselves or they're not hurting you. Let them do it, or just pick your battles. Okay, because you don't want to get into situations where you're aggravating situations, and people getting angry or getting frustrated, because it's very difficult to seek support right now. And again, if they can do something, let them do it. Don't feel like you have to correct them all the time. And the advice that I'm telling you is all things that I wish I would have known. I really believe if I would have been better educated, I would have most likely been a better caregiver, and it would have avoided a lot of the stress and frustration and anger that I felt my mother was showing towards me. So, there's things that you can control, and there's things that you can't control. You can control your living environment right now as much as possible. So you can control your noise levels. You can control, you know, try to get a bit of a routine going. You can control your approach. You can choose to get mad at the person, or you can choose not to get mad at the person. Okay. What you cannot control right now is truly how this disease is evolving. Okay. What we do know is, though, you want to keep your loved ones safe, because if they do fall or get injured, it will make the disease progress quicker. Okay. So you really want to make sure that you have a safe home environment. Okay. But in general, you cannot control this disease. There is nothing that you can do to prevent it from the way it will choose to prevent itself, progress itself. Okay. You can't control the virus outside, but you can control as much as possible ways to keep yourself safe. So, just to wrap up, what I'd like to do is really tell you what's my prescription of care. So, how did I go from suffering and burnout to doing the work that I'm doing today. Well, I needed a lot of support. I'll be honest with you. I had to like raise the white flag and say, I need help. The day that I reached that terrible, terrible burnout, I needed help. I wasn't able to do this on my own anymore. One of the things that I did learn though is that because when I suffered my burnout, it was in 2011, and I still had about 5 years left on the caregiving journey. And I knew that I needed to preserve my energy. So what I need, and I needed to like kind of become much more empowered. I had to look at my life and say, who are the places? So not places. So what are the commitments, people, and projects that I'm currently involved with that are just not serving me anymore? Okay. So with regards to commitments, we all perhaps would like to volunteer for different things, or, we're on different committees. When I would get that email where I was asked to be part of something, and I looked at it and went, oh my gosh, I don't feel like it. I knew then and there that it was time to let it go. Okay. When I, even to this day, or people, for instance, I was choosing my boundaries. I mean, now I definitely have more time to myself, but before COVID, when I was invited to a dinner party or when I was invited to have lunch with certain people, I always said to myself, are these people going to how are they going to are they adding positive energy to me, or are they not? When my mother was first diagnosed, a couple of her friends would accuse me of saying, oh, she's nothing's wrong with her. I would try to avoid them. I wouldn't answer their calls anymore because they were just adding toxic energy to me. Okay. Now, with regards to family members, I know it's difficult to pick and choose, but what I recommend to people, for instance, is instead of planning sometimes dinners with people, plan lunch, because lunch is much shorter. Dinners are longer, dinners involve alcohol, so people end up saying things that they shouldn't say. But it's really about just taking an inventory of your life and saying what matters and what doesn't matter. And then don't apologize for that. Okay. The only person that matters is yourself. And it's about being vulnerable. Don't wait like I did until the end, until I was reaching a complete burnout before I asked for help. When you know and you feel that you're struggling, press that like abort button, say, okay, I need help. So what's most important is acceptance. To be in a state of denial doesn't serve any purpose. So you really need to accept what's happening. This is happening to us. This is happening to our family. Because if you don't get to a point of acceptance, you can't go to the next level and then really seek out the support that you need. You need to let go of who the person used to be and just learn to communicate and evolve to who the person is becoming. It's not up to the person who was diagnosed to change. It's up to us to change. And also you need to be flexible because you're constantly in a state of having to evolve and change. So the routines that are working now may not be working in 6 months and may not be working in a year. So you just have to be open to change. Also, number one, I put this at the first, really is about educating yourself. So what you're doing tonight, go and attend as many webinars as you can that Dementia Society is going to be offering. Educate, understand, learn about the disease, learn what's coming next, learn about the resources in the community that can help you. But learn like now, be prepared now. Okay. Plan for the future. It's all about who, having those difficult discussions about who has the mandate. Okay. If you don't have a mandate, you can't make those important decisions for your loved ones. So if they start making all those financial errors and you have to now, go to the bank and say, oh my gosh, they've just transferred $10,000. If you don't have the mandate, there's nothing that you can do. So get your legal affairs in order, get your financial affairs in order, find out about home care support, find out about residences. I don't know what it's like in Ontario, but the public healthcare system, it's 2 to 3 year waiting list. So you need to make all your plans sooner than later, okay? Seek out support as soon as possible. Do not wait. Try to participate in virtual support groups. If support groups aren't for you, then try to see if there's anybody that you can talk to on a professional level if you're feeling that you're heading towards a burnout. There are a lot of people like myself, consultants like myself, we are doing a lot of telemedicine. Okay, you just need to look and inquire and ask if it's available to you, if those type of resources are available. And it's important to seek out support as soon as possible, because as the disease progresses, I call it anchoring. So the person that you're caring for, they're not going to want anybody else to look after them. They only want you to look after them. Okay. So the longer you wait to introduce third party help, it's going to be much more difficult to add in support when you need it. Now, I understand during COVID, it's difficult to let different people come into your home. Okay, so you need to do your research. If you're working with home care agencies, make sure that the person that is working for you is not necessarily going to 2 or 3 different families. Okay, but the sooner that you could introduce third party support, the better it will be for you. Okay, and then with regards to understanding and responding to challenging behaviors, again, using the compassionate lie, joining their journey, picking your battles. Okay, please, like, we're all nitpicking on each other right now. When you're home, everybody's getting on each other's nerves. I've got care partners calling me crying, frustrated, angry. It's because we're all feeling right now that we're all under house arrest. Okay, but it's important to really pick your battles. Safety, after tonight's webcast, please walk around your home. Make sure that it's safe in your house. Check besides the bed that there's no cords that your loved one could trip over. Are there night lights in the bathroom? Are there night lights in the hallway? Okay, is there any potential risk that your loved one could fall? Again, you don't want to end up in the hospital. If they are starting to wander at night, if you have an alarm system, put on the alarm system. All right, but don't ever take it for granted. Don't think, oh, because they've never been in the kitchen cooking, that they're just wandering in there. Go and check, make sure the stoves are turned off, the oven. All right, so really do a safety assessment in your home. And then, I always make sure that when it was time to transition, that the people that I was entrusting my mother's care to understood who she was. Okay, I wish I would have known more about her. So, for example, when she was transitioned to a long-term care facility, and there were days that she didn't eat, I did not know why she wasn't eating. Was it because she didn't like peas and carrots or chicken? I did not know really what her food preferences were, right? So, who is this person? What are her likes? What are her dislikes? When it gets to the point where the person can no longer communicate, and you have to really represent them, like, what is it that could be causing challenging behaviors? Why are they upset today? What is hurting them, right? Like, for example, my mother used to be a hairdresser, and the way that we would communicate when she was no longer able to speak was by me allowing her to brush her hair, for example. Okay, so who was this person? What are her likes and her dislikes? And then the other thing I need to say is to really you need to be prepared for the progression of the disease and those end of life decisions that you need to make. I was not prepared. I had no idea what to expect. And also, what I didn't realize is that after my mom passed away, there was nobody there offering grief support. And I didn't realize that the impact of her passing would have on me. I'd have a lot of people saying to me, "Oh, Claire, it'll be better off when she's not there, but you'll be better off," because they saw how, I would have been managing so many things. But nobody could have prepared me for that grief. Okay, so it's important to be kind to yourself. It's important to seek support out as well during this grieving process. And most importantly, to end, it's about giving yourself permission to have a life. A lot of caregivers say, well, no, I can't. I really shouldn't be having dinner with my friends. I really shouldn't be going out. I can't leave my loved one. If they can't do it, I can't. It's not true. You have permission to have a life. Okay, we spend too much time in a place of guilt and not wanting to live our own lives, and it's not serving any purpose. We deserve to have a life. We deserve to be fueled with good energy. We deserve to take care of ourselves, and the key to doing all that, honestly, once again, is through education. So I would like to thank you all for listening to my presentation. I'm going to be looking forward to answering your questions. For more information about resources, our program, you can go to mcgill.ca/dementia, and as well as by Googling Caregiver Crosswalk, you'll see some interviews and some other webcasts that I've done. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire, for this wonderful presentation. It's truly amazing, all the insight that you've been able to bring to us tonight just by sharing your journey. So thank you so much again for that. And I just want to open up the conversation to everyone who has joined us both on Zoom and on Facebook. Feel free to enter any of your questions for Claire in the chat box, in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring those to see what we have. So go ahead if you have any questions at all. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions coming up right now. Maybe we will give it another moment. Again, you can use the Q&A or the chat box to just type your questions right in if you have any questions for Claire. And Claire, I believe you said that you had potentially some extra resources to share with the group. Did you want to briefly touch on those?
Sure. Well, like I said, I have these McGill Cares webcast series that I started doing in May. And I've interviewed, different healthcare professionals on all kinds of subjects relating to dementia. So there's ones on understanding dementia, activities of daily living, coping and managing challenging behaviors, managing caregiver stress. So that would be just by Googling what you see on my screen here, McGill Cares. And then I will also be sending a link to German about the dementia activity booklet, which would hopefully keep everybody busy, during the coming next few weeks of isolation.
Okay, wonderful. And we do have one question here.
Okay.
So they're wondering, could you share how we can do the safety proof for Alzheimer's patients?
Okay, so basically what you need to do is kind of like you would imagine if you left a toddler at home on their own, right? Like what could a toddler potentially, the different types of things that they could get into. So, if we look at the kitchen, for example, what would be dangerous in a kitchen? Well, the microwave oven, like if I'm going to heat up a cup of coffee, for example, I would know to put it in 30 seconds. So a microwave oven is a dangerous appliance because the person could accidentally put in 3 minutes or put in a bowl or a cup that shouldn't be put in there that could, aluminum or these gold plated plates. So it's about going around the kitchen, is there any types of chemicals that could be mistaken for, like I said, Lysol for olive oil. We've heard many cases of people mistaking those dishwasher tablets for candy. So leaving the stove on, leaving an iron on, the bathroom as well, as the disease progresses, you be mindful of medications, too much medications. I mean, you really have to make sure that, if that they're not, they won't be taking medication on their own. A lot of people have medications lying in the kitchen, lying by the bedside, lying in the bathroom. Is there any risk of people swallowing pills? For, the other example is using razors, okay, as it progresses. That's very dangerous. Turning on the hot water. A lot of families find that as it progresses, the loved one doesn't want to take a shower anymore. For whatever reason, we don't know why, but just the feeling of the shower on the head is at times uncomfortable for people. And also it's as it progresses, what we call activities of daily living start to disappear. So they may go into the shower and not know how to adjust the water temperatures. So it's about going around the house. And I really, my biggest concern is falls. So if you have stairs in your home that are either like those marble stairs or wood stairs that don't have any runners, and the person's going around in socks, they could be at a very big risk for falls. So it's really room to room, going around. If your loved one has started like shuffling their feet and they're not lifting, are there wires? Are there carpets where they can trip on? Beside the bed, is there slippers? So it's those types of different safe proofing things that you should be considering.
Okay, great. So we have another question here. Michelle says, my mom lives on her own still. I've installed railings for safety, but how can we deal with pushback regarding smaller things like night lights? Trying to keep her sense of independence, but being mindful of what she does in her own home.
So the pushbacks will always happen because I always look at it that, it's dementia that's speaking on behalf of the person. One of the things that dementia does is it takes away the person's complete sense of logic and reasoning. So it's almost like you've got that devil on the shoulder telling the person what to say and what not to say. Your primary responsibility as a caregiver is the person's safety, happiness, and the cleanliness. And oftentimes you've got to do it by tough love. You know, a lot of times I speak to so many families and they're like, oh my gosh, she's going to be upset. He's going to be upset. I don't want to take the keys to the car. I don't want to bring in help. I don't want to do this because they're going to get upset. My mother was from Finland and she was a stubborn Finn and she was furious the day that well, actually, I didn't because the doctor removed her license. But when it was time to move, nothing that I did, she agreed with. But I knew at the end of the day, as much as she was kicking and screaming, everything that I did was for her best interest. So you will have to make that decision. You will have to take those tough decisions because it's a disease speaking. They will never willingly accept changes. You will have to be and put in this tough love. And I promise you that as time goes on, you know, the fights that you're having today will not be the fights or those arguments as time goes on. Okay. Everything that you're doing is to protect their safety and well-being.
Okay, great. We have just a couple more questions here. Someone is wondering whether or not there are any courses you could recommend for caregivers potentially offered online or other resources online.
Yeah, great online resources, and then they'll give you the links of everything. So Alzheimer's Disease International, I think they recently changed their link, but just Google Alzheimer's Disease International. It's the governing world body of all the Alzheimer's alliances. Go on that website and then you'll see per country all the different information and all the different resources. There's also Alzheimer's Society of Canada that has an excellent resource. You know, Dementia Society of Ottawa and Renfrew County has really good resources. So a lot of the different societies or Alzheimer groups, there's a lot of information right now available on the web. You know, I just see a question here that I would really like to answer is, can you talk a bit more about what was happening with your mom when you decided to move her out of private care? Yes, I realized that she wasn't safe. She wasn't clean. You know, again, it all came down to education. I mean, when it was time, when she could no longer live on her own and we moved her into a private residence, they had been promoting memory care. Memory care doesn't mean dementia care. And she truly wasn't safe. And I realized that the staff just weren't receiving the training that they needed. And so when I started noticing, you know, that her diapers weren't being changed, she wasn't being given showers, or just the way the staff were speaking to me with regards to, like, you know, your mother doesn't listen. You know, well, of course she doesn't listen. My mother at this point was supposed to be on a memory care floor, lockdown floor. And just by the communication I was having with the staff or lack thereof, I knew that it wasn't the right place for her anymore. But again, you know, because we had gone through basically all of her life savings, you know, and we had to go to the public system, it's when I really had to start advocating on her behalf. So, you know, I just started photographing, like you saw the image that I showed, I photographed Broken Hand. I started writing down days that I had visited when she wasn't clean, because I really needed to have a case for support with the social worker, you know, because they tell you that there's these waiting lists in the public health care. You know, I really wanted to make sure that she was up high there on the waiting list. It was a lot of work, though, I'll tell you. I mean, you know, being an advocate on behalf of a loved one is a lot of work, but it is so worth it.
Okay, wonderful. And I just see one more question here. So this will be our last one. Given doctor confidentiality, how can you know about your parents' condition if they're maybe not as open about it? So they're wondering specifically about a situation where their parent has not been diagnosed, but they are seeing some signs and symptoms of potentially dementia or Alzheimer's. So they're wondering potentially how to navigate that relationship with learning more about their parents' diagnosis if their parent might not be as willing to share.
Well, I mean, often at times, especially now, I mean, there is a whole new movement with healthcare with regards to having a better relationship with the patient and the doctor. What I would suggest to the person who has asked me the question is, if you can reach out privately to the doctor and let them know that you are if you are, hopefully you are the primary caregiver of your mother or your father, and say these are your concerns. And is there anything that they can tell you about it? Because, well, first of all, especially if the person has been diagnosed with the illness, hopefully they will have some type of a relationship and be able to share some information. um, what I wish I would have done differently is when the first appointment that I had with my mother, I didn't think of having a private conversation at all with the doctor. So when I was sitting beside her and I was explaining to the doctor why we were there, she was beside me saying, "Claire, it's ridiculous, you're lying," et cetera, et cetera. What I would say also is that you really need to learn as much as possible about the signs and symptoms, because at the end of the day, even if you take your loved one to see a specialist, if it is dementia, there are some medications. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go into it, but really there is no cure. And the only cure is really understanding what's coming next. The other thing that's very important is that sometimes there could be other health conditions that present themselves that where the symptoms could look like dementia, but it may not be. So if all of a sudden you're seeing changes in your parent, okay, even if it's memory, behavior, you really need to take them to have a full checkup. And if they don't want to go, you can say to them, "Look, I've noticed that you're not really feeling well. We need to go and have a checkup." But sometimes it could be medication that's not working. It could be some type of bladder infection. But there could be other things going on that need to be checked out by the doctor.
Okay, wonderful. And we actually do have just one more question. This will be
Okay.
the last one before we
Okay.
wrap up. So someone is wondering, they say, "My mother is in a seniors residence and we are not able to visit during the lockdown. She can still answer the phone, but it is becoming harder to understand her stories and concerns. What are your thoughts about putting a camera in her unit where we could see her when she was on the phone, but maintain her privacy in her bedroom and bathroom?"
That's a really hard question. I really don't know how to answer that one. I know that it's harder to get the phone, and it's people are really concerned. Um, it's a hard question for me to answer because I don't know the policies of whether or not some residences, will allow cameras in the room or not. There's, in one way, yes, if there was a camera there, you can keep an eye on the person. The downfall is, and I have a friend who did it, you become just completely and utterly obsessed. You can't let go. Hopefully you can try to have more of you develop a relationship with somebody there. And I know that the healthcare system they're completely overwhelmed. It's very hard to reach loved ones, but hopefully, being with a lot of kindness and patience, you could get an ally there, who would make sure that when you do call, that you can speak to her. But I know that it's such a challenging situation. That's a really hard question to answer.
Okay, so I guess we will wrap it up with that. I wanted to say another thank you to Claire for this wonderful presentation, just so insightful, and thank you for answering everyone's questions. And thank you all for tuning in. I wanted to just say a quick reminder that on Wednesday, January 27th at noon, we will continue this Dementia Talk series with a presentation on communication problems in dementia. And I also wanted to send out a bit of a reminder that if you do need any dementia care coach resources or dementia care resources, our website is really a wealth of information and resources for this specifically. So please visit our website and check out the various education programs and support that the Dementia Society has to offer. Our website is www.dementiahelp.ca. And you can also register for our weekly newsletter on there and some other regular communications that we put out to stay up to date on webinars like this one. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you again, Claire, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.